Today is Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all you moms out there. We are not going to have a traditional Mother's Day message this morning. However, we are going to hear from a mom. It's my intention to talk to you this morning from the book of Ruth. Ruth was a mom, so you're going to hear from a mom. But it's not going to be our normal Mother's Day message. Excuse me, the book of Ruth. Ruth is one of only 2 books in all of Scripture that are titled with a woman's name. That in and of itself should help us to understand the importance of those 2 books. A lot can be gained and learned from both of these, and Ruth is the one we are going to focus in on today. This short book contains only 4 chapters. Those 4 chapters are made up of 85 verses. So it's not a very long book, but it is a book that gives us a lot to think about. Typically, when you hear about Ruth, it's talked about as a book of redemption, and it very much is. There's a great redemption narrative to the whole book of Ruth. But that's not where we're going to focus in on this morning. We're going to learn quite a few other little things about the book of Ruth this morning, and a couple of women that God protected, specifically Ruth herself, we're going to talk about. So when we get started this morning, I am to first start by giving you an overview, a synopsis of the book. There's a lot of people that are not as familiar with Old Testament text as they are New Testament. Ruth is an Old Testament book. So I want to take the time this morning to kind of do a review of the entire book. Fear not, I said it's only 4 chapters. It's not going to take us a week. I'll go through it somewhat quickly, but I want to give you an overview of the book this morning. The book starts out with talking about a famine. There's a famine in the land where Elimelech and his family are living. Now, I'm going to spew out a couple of names for you this morning. I don't expect you to remember them all. Just try to keep the basic storyline here. Elimelech's family is kind of who we're talking about, and he was living in an area where there was a famine, so he chose to move his family to a neighboring area called Moab. Now understand, this was pretty much a time of peace between Israel and Moab. However, Moab was considered to be a nation of idolaters. They worshipped different idols. So they were not seen as good or wonderful people to the Israelites. While living in this land, the land of Moab, Elimelech and Naomi, who is his wife, have 2 sons, and their sons grow up and get married to a couple of ladies from Moab. Again, this is kind of a no-no, so to speak, in the eyes of the Israelites. They shouldn't have been intermixing themselves with people from Moab, but his 2 sons marry 2 young ladies from Moab. We're not given a lot of detail about what happens next, but we're told that sometime after their family moves to Moab, Elimelech dies. And after they've been in the land for about 10 years or so, both of their sons die as well. So this leaves Naomi, the mom, and the 2 daughter-in-laws on their own in Moab. They make the decision to leave there and to go back to Naomi's home, back to Judea. For some reason, it's not until after they start on their journey, they start on their way back, that Naomi suddenly decides that the 2 girls shouldn't come with her. Not quite sure why she waited till they were on the journey back, but that's how it was. And she says, you guys just need to go back to your own home, your own mom, your own homeland. And at first, both of her daughter-in-laws say, no, we're with you. We're gonna go with you. We're gonna stay with you. But Naomi is a little bit harder, and she tells them, listen, I have nothing to offer you. I can do nothing for you. I'm an old lady. I'm not going to have any more kids. Even if I did, would you wait for my sons to grow up to marry them? There's nothing I can do for you. Go back to your own home. And this really is where the character of Ruth who is one of Naomi's daughter-in-laws, really begins to shine. She begins to stand out right at this point. The other daughter-in-law is a lady by the name of Orpah. Orpah listened to Naomi and decided that it would in fact be best if she just went back to her own home. So she gave Naomi a kiss and she took off, headed back to her own homeland. But Ruth says, no, I am not going to leave you. I'm not going to abandon you. In fact, Ruth makes at this point in the text a very bold statement, and really a changing statement of her entire life. I'm going to read this part of the text to you quickly this morning. Ruth 1:16 through 18. Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. Then Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, so she stopped urging her. Ruth at that moment was not only declaring her love and her attention and her affection for Naomi, but she was declaring her commitment to God. In that whole statement, she was saying, I will be with you and I will serve your God all the days of my life. So the two of them take off and they head back towards Naomi's homeland, and they get as far as Bethlehem, where it happens to be time for the barley harvest. By this time, Ruth realizes that truly Naomi is not going to be able to provide for her or help her in any way. So Ruth says to Naomi, I will go and glean in the fields. What does it mean to glean in the fields? That was something that was very common during their time frame. See, a person would follow behind those that were doing the harvesting, and they would pick up whatever the harvesters missed or left behind. This simply really was a way for those that were poor, that had no other means of providing for themselves. This was a way for them to go out and food for themselves and for their family. Now remember, Ruth didn't know this land or these people. She was now a foreigner in a strange place, but she was willing to go out and do the work that needed to be done for her and for Naomi's survival. As it turns out, the Lord led Ruth to the exactly perfect field for her to work in. She found herself gleaning in a field that's owned by Boaz. And Boaz was a relative of Elimelech, that guy we started talking about in the beginning this morning, Naomi's husband. Ruth was absolutely shown favor by the fact that the Lord led her here. Boaz was not only the relative, as we already talked about, but Boaz had heard of Ruth's commitment to Naomi and how much she had done for her mother-in-law. And he saw how hard she was willing to work to provide for her and her mother-in-law. So Boaz told her, you stay close to my people, to my servants. I'll even give you some food to eat. He would even offer protection. Boaz did several things for her that you wouldn't normally find when somebody was out gleaning in the field. Then he even went beyond that. He told the harvesters to leave her alone. Don't do anything to harm her or discourage her, and leave some extra grain behind. Leave some there for her to pick up. Don't take it all away from her. So she's out gleaning in the field, and then as time goes on, Naomi tells Ruth to call out to Boaz as her kinsman redeemer. Some of us have heard that statement before. Let me just tell you what a kinsman redeemer is. This is a male relative who, according to various laws throughout the Pentateuch, has the privilege and the responsibility to act on the behalf of a relative who is either in trouble or danger, In this case, the Redeemer would be reaching out because Naomi and Ruth were without both husband or children. They were widows. They were alone. It was just the two of them. So the kinsman Redeemer would have the responsibility to protect them and to cover them. Boaz knew that this was the case. Boaz also knew that he was not the first in line. There was somebody else that was a closer relative that should have the opportunity to be this Redeemer. But Boaz was willing to work things out, whatever needed to be done, to make sure that both Naomi and Ruth were provided for. And that's exactly what he did throughout the text. He went, he confronted this other relative, and in the end, Boaz wound up being the kinsman Redeemer. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. When that took place, he took Ruth in as his wife. So she became Boaz's wife. Boaz provided for both Ruth and Naomi, which means she didn't have to go out and glean in the field anymore. They both were under Boaz's protection. And then at the end of the book, it announces another incredible blessing upon Ruth. Boaz and Ruth become parents. So they become moms and dad. But it's not just the parent to any child. They're the parent of Obed, who is the father of Jesse, whose son is King David. So Ruth is King David's great-grandmother. And we know that through David, through his line, comes Jesus. So I want you to think about this real quick account of Ruth this morning. She was an idol worshiper who marries an Israelite, then loses her husband, then leaves her family, declares her allegiance to God, is shown favor in a strange land, is redeemed by someone else's relative. In essence, she moves from rags to riches, and then is blessed to have a child and for their family to be in the house or the line of David. That's just a quick picture of Ruth's life this morning. So there's no doubt, as you can see, there's lots of different things we can learn from Ruth. The whole redemption idea is just one small part of it. This morning, we're going to look at a couple of other pieces. I want to break down a few parts of this and talk about a few specific things this morning. First thing I want to touch base on is the fact that Ruth was committed to her mother-in-law. We don't know at this point throughout this text, we don't know how old Ruth was when all of this occurred. We get some general understanding that she was still young. Ruth 1:9 says that, "May the Lord grant you each that you find rest in the home, husband." So we get the impression that she was still young enough to marry. In chapter 4 and verse 12, she's referred to as a young woman. And then earlier we read verses 16 through 18 of chapter 1 where Ruth said, "Listen, I'm not concerned about all of that stuff, Naomi. I'm going to stay with you. I'm committed to you. I'm here to help you." Finding a new husband was not Ruth's priority. That was not something that was important to her. She not only loved her mother-in-law, but they truly became friends. They were there to encourage each other, to support each other, to help each other. Ruth realized that Naomi needed the additional help, that there was much she could not do on her own. She knew that Naomi needed her. Through everything that had happened to Naomi, Naomi actually became very bitter. In fact, in verse 20 of chapter 1, when she's back talking with some of her old friends, she tells them, "Don't call me Ruth anymore. Call me Mara." Mara means bitter. She had grown bitter because of everything that had happened to her in her life. But even with Naomi's change in her attitude, with her change in demeanor, Ruth was not willing to leave her side. Ruth was there to walk with her, to talk with her, to support her. There was no way she was going to leave her in her time of need. So much so that Ruth actually chose her mother-in-law over her own family and home. Think about that for just a moment. How many of us are willing to leave everything for our mother-in-law? We all have to think about that for a time, or don't we? Maybe, sometimes. Ruth displayed some incredible character here by choosing to stay with Naomi. A choice that not only affected her, but truly it affected her entire family heritage going forward. Secondly, Ruth was a willing servant. In fact, Ruth actually saw herself as less than a servant. She knew in this idea of gleaning and being out in the field, she knew that she had to stay well behind those that were doing the harvesting. That meant she was behind even the girls. She recognized the fact that she was a foreigner in this land and that most people would look at her as less than a servant. In fact, in her own words, she said, "I do not have the standing of one of your servants." She recognized her position as a foreigner gleaning in the field. But why was she the one out gleaning to begin with? Because of her willing heart, her desire to serve her mother-in-law. The fact that she knew that Naomi was not able to do that on her own. So she was willing to go out and do that physically demanding work to provide for both her and her mother-in-law. And Ruth volunteered to go. No one asked her. She volunteered. Ruth chapter 2 and verse 2. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." She was not asked. She saw that there was a need. She saw that there was a way for that need to be fulfilled, and she acted on it. She went out and did what she knew she needed to do to help out. Not only did she go and do the work, but she went and did it well. We read a little bit further down in chapter 2, verse 7. She went into the field and had worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. She was willing to go, and she was willing to work hard. And don't forget, she was a foreigner, doing it not for a blood relative, but for her mother-in-law. Think about the willing servant heart that she had. Not only did she have to work hard all day gleaning out in the field, but after she had gathered all that barley, she had to go and thrash it. You see, they didn't have John Deere tractors back then. They didn't have all this automated technology to help out with things back then. Everything was done by hand. So after she gathered all of the grain, she had to go thrash it. Thrash it was a process of separating the seed from the plant, which meant it was more additional work that she had to do. And all of the work that she did all day long, Scripture tells us, produced about an ephah of grain. Everybody knows what that is, right? About a 5-gallon bucket full of grain. So you and I would look at that and say, a day's worth of work, all of that physical energy to get maybe a 5-gallon bucket of grain. But Naomi was thrilled when she saw how hard Ruth had worked and how much she had brought in just one day. Again, a testimony to Ruth's willingness to serve and to be a servant. Day after day, this would become Ruth's life. This was now what she would do. She would get up, she would go out and glean in the field, she would go thresh the grain, she would bring it back for her and her mother-in-law. At this point, there was no sign of any change that laid ahead. But Ruth was willing day after day to go out and do that same thing and to be that humble servant. Let's look at the third thing this morning that I want to talk about, and it's Ruth's obedience. While she was out working in the field, Boaz gave her some very specific instructions to follow. Stay close, do this, do that. And she listened and obeyed those instructions from Boaz. Naomi also gave her instructions, told her to stay close to his servant girls. She knew the possibility of Ruth getting hurt or something else happening, so she told her, stay close. And again, Ruth was obedient and stayed close. But then in chapter 3, this is the part that I really want to focus in on this morning when it comes to obedience. Naomi urged Ruth to present herself to Boaz and to ask him to redeem her family. We have to understand this again this morning. Ruth was a Moabite, a foreigner, someone that for the most part the Israelites really didn't like or care for or associate with. She already had realized that she was a servant or less than a servant, and now her mother-in-law was asking her, telling her really, to go and seek out Boaz as our kinsman redeemer. This meant that Ruth was going to get herself ready. She was going to wash. She was going to put on her nicest clothes. There was a whole series of events that Ruth was going to do to get herself ready and then go to Boaz, which is what, if we read through the text, you would find out she did. She went to the threshing floor. Boaz was alone. And then she laid down at his feet. By doing this, by laying down at Boaz's feet, Ruth was basically asking him to marry her. By presenting herself in this way, she presented herself as a bride, and she was appealing to Boaz to fulfill his obligation as her redeemer. I'm sure being a foreigner and not knowing all the ins and the outs of the kinsman redeemer, she had to listen carefully to Naomi. So Ruth took instruction from Naomi and followed her direction, obeying her urging, obeying her leading. When Boaz, he actually had dozed off, when Boaz woke up and found Ruth at his feet, he asked her, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Ruth was not slow in answering. Chapter 3 and verse 9, she responds, "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." Spreading the garment would be an indication that, yes, in fact, he takes on that responsibility of being that redeemer. Boaz instructs her to stay there for the night, which she did. Text tells us she left before anybody saw her. And I don't want that to add confusion to us. There's no sign, there's no indication of any kind of a moral slip here. Boaz simply gave her some direction to stay at his feet where she was for the evening. But she left before others could see her, because technically a woman was not supposed to be at the threshing floor. Something else to think about here. In being obedient to Naomi, Ruth was willing to go and do everything, including ask Boaz basically to marry her, without really even knowing who this man was. She had had some interaction with him. Yes, she talked to him a little bit, but hardly enough time to truly know who this man was. but she was willing to listen to Naomi and obey her direction. When Naomi instructed Ruth to present herself to Boaz, we read absolutely nothing about Ruth disagreeing or arguing. We again see an obedient heart in her. She's willing to go and to be with a man that she truly doesn't know, someone she's not even related to, all out of being obedient to her mother-in-law. Fourth this morning, and lastly, God blessed Ruth. When Ruth presented herself to Boaz, several things could have happened here. First and foremost, Boaz could have turned on her because, as I said, she was not supposed to be at the threshing floor. So it could have gone very poorly. Secondly, Boaz could have simply said, no, I'm not interested in honoring that obligation or being that redeemer. I'm not interested in helping you or your mother-in-law. But that's not what happened. God's blessing was upon Ruth and Naomi in all of this. So as Ruth was obedient, God continued to pour out his blessing. Boaz was not only willing to be her redeemer, but he wanted to make sure he did it properly. He went and addressed the other individual that was a closer relative that had the opportunity. That gentleman said no, so Boaz said yes, absolutely, I will redeem Naomi and Ruth. This meant that Boaz would, yes, purchase their land, take over their land, but it also meant that Boaz would protect and provide for the widows, Naomi and Ruth. The Lord blessed Ruth with a loving, caring mother-in-law, with a husband, a new husband that would now protect her and provide for her. She wouldn't have to go out and work in the fields any longer. Remember, she had no idea how all of this was going to turn out when she left Moab with Naomi. You know, we read the end and we read the whole story. Oh, yeah, okay, that all makes sense. Ruth had no idea what was going to transpire in her life, in her journey. But she was willing to do what she believed was right, to help her mother-in-law, to honor God, to be obedient, to become a servant. Not only was she blessed with the family, with a new husband, she was blessed with a new family, with a child. Ruth 4:13, Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. But it doesn't even stop there. You see, this was no ordinary son, as we already talked about, but this was a relative of David, the line of Jesus. So I want us to think about something for a minute, because I'm not sure we all pick this up all the time. But do we understand what this means? It means there was both Jewish and Gentile blood, David's line. And from David's line came Jesus. Redemption for all mankind. An absolutely amazing woman for us to read about and for us to draw lessons from this morning. She was an overcomer. She was selfless. She was devoted to helping and caring for those that needed help. We talked about 4 different aspects this morning: committed to her mother-in-law, willingness to serve, obedient to the direction she was given, and of course we talked about being blessed. And there's more. If you continue to read through the book, you will find other things that we can draw from Ruth and her character and who she was. She can be an example to us all. If we read this whole account carefully, we see such a beautiful reflection of God's own love here. One individual caring so much, loving so much, they're willing to set aside everything else they have ever known, to leave behind friends and family. Think about that for a minute. How many of us are willing to do that? Leave behind everything else we know to show love to one person. Such great godly love was displayed in Ruth. She gave and gave and gave of herself. Never once do we ever read of her self-centeredness or selfishness or thinking about how it could or would or might benefit her. But always she was willing to go and to do and to meet the need of someone else. To meet the need of another person. See, this woman called Ruth holds lots and lots of different lessons that we need to learn and apply to our lives today.